Namaste and hello there. My name is Abhijit. Today we are going to start an in-depth series on Microsoft SQL Server administration and development. In previous videos we have seen history and evolution of DBMS systems. Today we will take a look at history of SQL programming language, evolution of Microsoft SQL Server, MSSQL Server build numbers developed in all these years, some knowledge on 32-64-bit processors, service pack or patch management, different editions of SQL Server, and finally server licensing and pricing of SQL Server. One video for all these topics would be long, so I have divided into two parts. First 5 points will be covered in this video: MS SQL Server editions and MS SQL Server licensing and pricing will be covered in next video. So let's get started. SQL is a structured query language. It is a programming language to communicate with relational databases. It was first introduced in 1970 by IBM researchers Raymond Boyce and Donald Chamberlain. The language that time was known as SQL, that is SEQUEL, SQL. This language was first introduced by Sir Ejner Frank Codd, that is Sir E.F. Codd, who is also known as father of SQL or relational DBMS. He proposed that data in a database can be represented in the form of relations, and it is supposed to use in IBM's DBMS system called SystemR. But several years later, SQL language was made available to public by IBM. In 1979, a company called Relational Software, which later became Oracle, commercially released its own version of SQL language called Oracle V2. Since then, American National Standard Institute, that is ANSI, and International Standards Organization, that is ISO, have deemed SQL language as standard language in relational database communications. Just for your info, ANSI and ISO are an organization that approves certain standards in many different industries, which is accepted worldwide. For example, technology or software industry is one of them. In later 1980s, Microsoft started developing its own RDBMS called MS SQL Server, which was first released in 1989. So by using SQL language, Oracle commercially released its own version of SQL language called Oracle V2 in 1979. And by using same language, Microsoft released its first version of MS SQL Server in 1989. MS SQL Server, that is Microsoft SQL Server. This relational DBMS developed by Microsoft was to compete with Oracle and MySQL. Development of Oracle started very early than Microsoft SQL Server, but MySQL Server developed around 1994. Microsoft developed and implemented its own version of SQL language called Transact SQL or T-SQL. T-SQL provides further capabilities to SQL to declare variables, stored procedures, etc., which were not part of original SQL language. Originally released in 1989 as version 1 by Microsoft in conjunction with Sybase, SQL Server and its early versions were similar to Sybase. Microsoft Sybase partnership dissolved in early 1990s and Microsoft retained the rights to SQL Server trade name. Since then, Microsoft has started releasing SQL Server versions or builds by its own. Coming to next topic, that is SQL Server versions or build numbers. Since 1990 to 2019, Microsoft has released around 18 versions of SQL Server. I'll be calling MS SQL Server as SQL Server henceforth because I'll have to pronounce it multiple times. So in this table, you will find an year in which a particular version is released. Version name, version, code name. Microsoft always name its SQL versions by a code name. And finally, platform or OS on which you can use SQL Server. Recent version of SQL Server is SQL Server 2019, which can be run on Windows and Linux. Until SQL Server 2017, SQL Server was only running on Windows operating system. But now, Microsoft is developing it as platform independent system to widen their business. You can easily find out which version of SQL Server you are working on by looking at the server name while connecting in SSMS. SSMS is SQL Server Management Studio, a tool to connect to SQL Server. Let me show you. So here you can see server name as localhost. We are using Express edition of SQL Server and build number as 15.0. something. So if you know this table, you can easily find out version of SQL Server you are working on. Microsoft has now stopped supporting versions of SQL Server prior to 2008 R2. Please go through this table for additional knowledge. Here, even before Windows, Microsoft was developing SQL Server on their OS platform called OS by 2. Later, when Windows became mainstream, Microsoft started developing SQL Server on Windows OS since SQL Server 4.21. If you closely look at the table, you can find Microsoft was developing all versions of SQL Server on 16-bit processor until SQL Server 2000, which is first 32-bit SQL Server. And then by 2003, Microsoft released version of SQL Server 2000 in 64-bit processor. So it is always fascinating to know how our previous generations worked hard to develop systems we are easily using today. Now, just an additional info about processors. Processor in computer is used to receive input, process it, and provide output. A good processor is known by its faster processing speed, that is, the number of calculations they can perform per second. We can take an example of lanes on highway. A 32-lane highway can carry more vehicles than a 16-lane highway. 32-bit processor can access 2 raised to 32 memory addresses, so it is limited to 4 GB RAM. If you do 2 raised to 32, it comes 4 GB, which is maximum memory this processor can support, whereas 64-bit processor can access 2 raised to 64 memory addresses, which roughly comes to 18 billion GB RAM. So if we do 2 raised to 64 bits, it comes to 18 billion GB. Even though theoretically it comes to 18 billion GB, however, practical limit until 2019 of 64-bit processor is 8 TB of RAM. You might have observed that many 32-bit programs can run on 64-bit OS, but 64-bit programs are not compatible with 32-bit OS. Additionally, many 32-bit drivers and system utilities are incompatible with 64-bit systems. Therefore, while purchasing or downloading new software, it is important to know that if 32-bit or 64-bit OS is installed on your computer. Let's move on to patch management. Patch management is very important and crucial part of any system. Like every other software, SQL Server releases RTM version and then periodically provide cumulative updates, service packs, bug fixes, or introduce new features in the server. RTM is known as release to manufacturing. This is final released version of any software. After releasing RTM, Microsoft collects data from end user about any issues they face or any system fault they observe. They then create a hotfix for that problem. Hotfix is a code fix for specific issue or problem. Collection of multiple hotfixes is called cumulative updates. Microsoft publishes corresponding knowledge base, that is KB article, for every hotfix that is released for every Microsoft product. Let's say one cumulative update contains 10 hotfixes. So instead of applying those 10 hotfixes separately, we can install only one cumulative update at once. KB or knowledge base is an article in which description about problem and resolution of the same is mentioned. Service pack is a collection of updates, hotfixes, or any enhancement to existing software product. So service pack is a collection of multiple cumulative updates. Let's say after RTM release, Microsoft releases 10 cumulative updates. So all 10 cumulative updates plus any new updates will be available in service pack 1. So likewise, we have SP1, SP2, SP3 and SP4. That is Service Pack 1, Service Pack 2, Service Pack 3 and Service Pack 4 for every SQL Server previously. But now, Microsoft is not providing service packs since SQL Server 2017. Microsoft will only provide cumulative updates every second Tuesday of the month. That is also called as Patch Tuesday. That means one cumulative update with bunch of hotfixes every month. Why is that? Because previously Organizations used to wait till first service pack of SQL Server to ensure that the new system is stable and functioning as expected. Now, Microsoft has started cumulative updates every month and might reduce the updates once product gets older. So this is all for today. We will take a look at different editions of SQL Server, their use in practical world and licensing of SQL Server in next part. Till then, stay happy, stay blessed, keep learning and take care.